Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti and the City Council have been trying to raise the height limits of buildings in Hollywood. They say increased density is the only way to cope with a population increase. Hello, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Espinosa. Welcome.
And I'm Rick Reif. You know, not everyone agrees, Elizabeth, not by a long shot.
No.
Leading the charge on the other side of this battle are community groups. They say mega buildings will ruin their neighborhoods. They accuse the city of kowtowing to developers.
The building boom is taking place throughout Southern California. You've probably seen it yourself. Our own David Nazar has a look at the Los Angeles skyline, which is changing. I see it every day when I'm on the 110.
Elizabeth and Rick, it is a boom to say the least. I mean, everywhere you look in Los Angeles, there are new skyscrapers and real estate development of some sort being built. There's also new concern as to the stability of these mega buildings during a major earthquake. Warning, if you're afraid of heights, viewer discretion is advised. If not, a view of the downtown Los Angeles skyline from 70 stories above ground is something to see. In fact, 7 of the 10 tallest buildings in California are located in LA. Construction of the skyline began in the mid-1960s, and it continues today. Here in Los Angeles, skyscrapers are difficult and expensive to build due to what developers call rigorous engineering standards, and that's because of the city's high rate of earthquakes and proximity to the San Andreas Fault, and all the other fault lines for that matter. There are over 200 earthquake faults in Southern California, everywhere from the Puente Hills and Hollywood faults to the Newport Inglewood and Palos Verdes faults. Nevertheless, as Hal Bastian explains, density rules. Bastian is a downtown revitalization consultant. For years, he was with the Business Improvement District as both an executive vice president and director of economic development. We met him out here on the corner of 6th and Hope. For downtown, it kind of seems like this is the center of the universe.
Well, it is, and we radiate out from it. And we have all these large buildings like US Bank Tower, which is the tallest building between Chicago and Taipei in the northern hemisphere. She's right over here. The 707 Aeon Center, which is right behind us, the second tallest building. And downtown is all about density. We want more great big buildings here in downtown LA. And then over here is something that used to be called Arco Plaza. The 2 buildings, which are 515, 555 South Flower, they're over 50 stories tall each. So those are tall buildings.
How many buildings are being built these days, and what are developers working on?
There's over 24 buildings being built in downtown Los Angeles right now. Right now we have condominiums, we have apartments, we have the Wilshire Grand Hotel, which is going to be the tallest building in downtown Los Angeles when it's built, 73 stories, and it's going to have a spire. It's going to be taller than US Bank Tower.
Are you concerned with these massive buildings these days, especially because Los Angeles is basically sitting on a fault line or many fault lines?
Not concerned at all. These high-rise structures that we are building incorporate best practices from cities all around the world that experience earthquakes. So the safest place to be is in a high-rise building.
How are builders keeping us safe as these buildings get taller and taller?
Well, there's nothing but regulation that goes into the building of these buildings: structural engineering, city planning, city supervision by the LA Department of Building and Safety. These are the safest buildings ever built in the world stage.
When do you say to yourself, you know what, it is just too tall, we have to be careful in earthquake country?
There's just no such thing. We're never going to build a building that's too tall, that can't withstand earthquakes, because we have the engineering to deal with it. So it's really a non-issue.
Dr. Lucy Jones is the well-known seismologist from the United States Geological Survey in Pasadena. Jones has a different opinion about all these skyscrapers being built in earthquake country.
Am I worried that people are going to die in them? Not as, if they haven't followed the code, then there's a problem. But our code for earthquake-resistant construction is make sure we can all crawl out alive. And we do a pretty good job of that, right? The problem is that's our only standard. So if the building is a complete financial loss after the earthquake happens, as long as you can crawl out alive, the code says you're fine. That was your financial choice to make. The problem is it's not just your financial consequence. The person who has the building loses the building. But the tenants lose a place to go to work, their employees are losing their jobs, the neighbors perhaps can't go to work because of the potential that a bad building collapses on them. We can't use the street in front of it.
So are you saying the LA building code is substandard as far as being earthquake proof?
The building code everywhere is only life safety. It is not earthquake proof. It says it's your choice how strong a building you want. You just can't kill people in the process.
What does it take to build above code?
when we look at what does it take to build to a 50% stronger standards, you're talking about 1 to 2% increase in the cost of a project to build it to functionality instead of to life safety.
Now, Dr. Lucy Jones also tells me, and this is important to note, that in the event of a major quake, there's a 90% chance you won't have any building collapses. However, she underscores there will probably be about a 10% chance that all these new buildings will have at least a partial collapse, and there will be many red tag structures. Now, consequently, Hal Bastian told me these skyscrapers are specifically engineered to sway in a big earthquake. And in fact, Rick and Elizabeth, he even said he believes these are the safest places to be during a quake.
I don't know if I believe that just yet. You know what? And I don't even want to be here for the big one, but there it is. I mean, so it's supposed to be in our future.
Who do you believe?
Who do you believe? Thank you, David. Excellent report.
Thank you, David.
You know, one controversial project, you've heard about it, we've talked about it, the Hollywood Millennium project, which would have towers 39 and 35 stories high. This would be near the Capitol Records building.
Yes, a judge has put a stop to that project as of now. Community groups argued that the skyscrapers sit on the active Hollywood fault. Now, the pink lines on this map show two of the big fault lines in Southern California. The one on top is the Hollywood fault line. Mayor Eric Garcetti has just announced a new earthquake study zone.
Now, this is to ensure new buildings are not built on active fault lines. That's the key word here. The city's preliminary fault rupture study shows areas where active faults may exist that could cause ground to rupture during an earthquake.
If a development is proposed within this area, geologic investigations to determine the presence or absence of an active fault will be required before building permits are issued. Now, this fault study only affects new developments, not existing buildings.
Makes you think, right, when you're in a big building.
Yeah. And now joining us is Josh Stevens. Josh is a journalist and contributing editor at California Planning and Development Report. Also with us is Scott Chaplin, a partner with Green, Fiddler and Chaplin. He's a real estate lawyer for big development companies.
And also with us tonight, Kevin Keller. Kevin is the Director of Planning and Housing Policy with the City of Los Angeles for the mayor's office, Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti. Thank you so much for joining us. As you know, we talked about that Hollywood Millennium project because the issue has become that the state geologists deemed that it was sitting on an active fault line. And now we're hearing the city geologist says, no, that's not the case. So then I have to ask you, and I know you're not a geologist, so I want to put that out there, what defines an active fault line?
It's important to note that in this case, the issue is the project in a study area, a buffer area. So everyone basically agreed, yes, the project is in a study area. What really had to be done next was geologic trenching, boring on that site. What the city's looking for is whether the fault has been active in the last 11,000 years.
That's a long time.
Which is determined as being active. Correct.
And how do you even know what happened in the last 11,000 years?
Basically, the city's geology experts look at the layers of strata of dirt, and I'm not the geologist here, but they do on-site boring and testing and trenching, and so that's what the city has determined, that no active fault exists on that site.
You know, sometimes I hear these things about the fault lines. There are so many buildings already on the fault lines. It's like, you know, but I don't hear them saying we have to evacuate these people. Nobody else can work here or live here. It's just a new building, which brings me, Kevin, to what I want to ask you, these arguments about fault lines and that sort of thing, the CEQA regulations that you have to do and everything. I often hear lawyers like yourself representing developers arguing that it's really, it's kind of a game that's played and it's not really about the safety.
I think it's about the safety. I think there needs to be responsible development. Developers need to act responsibly. They need to interface with the city responsibly and with the citizenry. I think it's about safety. I think it's about more than safety. I've experienced buildings that have fallen down. I had a building fall down and was red tagged in the '94 earthquake. It was built to code. So from my perspective, at times, code is a minimum standard.
Let me ask you, Josh. I mean, you're a reporter. You've been covering what's happening with the city skyline. Let's consider that just 2 years ago, a judge did strike down a part of, you know, the zoning law that would allow for bigger buildings. And the issue with the Millennium project specifically is that now the judge has halted the process. There's nothing there, just to be clear. What's there is just some trenching, right, Kevin? And for those of you who are not in the area and don't know, you know, haven't seen this area. it's important to highlight that the environmental impact review report is still, yet to be, has to be duplicated, right? Because there was one that was put out, but the judge said that, Caltrans sent letters about traffic worsening in that area because it's right next to the 101, and that was not taken into consideration. From your perspective as a journalist covering all sides, what do you see is happening with residents as well?
It's really hard to discern what's really happening because in any land use issue, there are multiple issues. There's everything from seismic concerns and faults to traffic to what we sort of nebulously call neighborhood character. And Hollywood Millennium is a great example of what some people call NIMBYism, not in my backyard,
right,
of local neighbors who, for whatever reason, hate some project. Could be for many reasons. So it's hard to disaggregate. And it's hard to disaggregate which neighbors who say have a seismic concern are genuinely concerned about seismic issues, or they're using that as an canard. Because the CEQA law, I don't know of a more complicated law, certainly not in California, and it can be used in so many different ways. Some would say for good, some would say for bad. Actually, the rivalries are really complex on both sides, environmental sides and developer sides. So it's hard to discern what the real story is.
Kevin, just for the viewers, what is the CEQA law?
Well, it's the Environmental Quality Act, and it's talking about how you develop, what the impact of the development is on the community, what the impact is on the citizenry, what it is on the environment. At the end of the day, it's one of the things that bracket what a responsible developer can or should do.
Okay, and thank you, Scott. I keep calling you Kevin.
That's okay. I knew what I was.
Now you
That's okay. Well, I wasn't going to say anything, but there it is.
David, what were you going to ask?
How do we reconcile? Because look, the city needs the revenue. We know this is good for everyone at the same time. But I know that area very well where the Millennium Project is, and there's another big building that has been. We were just talking about it.
The Boulevard 6200 building just to the east is another new apartment building that's gone up in that area.
And there's the Taft area, Taft
there's
project.
some adaptive reuse. There's some new lofts going in as well into older buildings.
So Hollywood and Vine, which is that area, that's great. We certainly need, housing is an issue in Los Angeles, Greater Los Angeles, but what do we do to reconcile the needs of, the city, also the public, but also Caltrans has said there are issues with the 101 off-ramp being right there, and you're talking about a lot more density in terms of people using their vehicles to get around. We don't have a real great mass transit system here, do we?
Yeah, we actually do have a fantastic mass transit system right in that area of Hollywood. The Hollywood-Vine intersection is one of our red line stations, and I think when we talk about how are we going to accommodate the growth that's projected for the city, we're really looking at where can we best direct that growth. And some people may not understand the city has an adopted growth policy. It has what we call regional centers, designated regional centers like Century City, Warner Center in the Valley, Westwood, along the Century Boulevard at LAX, areas that have higher densities and have always been planned for higher densities. So Hollywood is one of those regional centers. Absolutely, there's some traffic that needs to be mitigated and taken into account, but also it has perhaps some of the best mass transit access in the city.
Yeah, but Josh, doesn't that, one of the problems is downtown, I think most people can get. Downtowns are supposed to go up, and downtown has a lot of area that's very easily developed and all that. And did I say Josh? Yeah. Yes, I did say Josh. Thank you. Okay, I'm all confused. So I'll tell you. Okay. But anyways, Josh. Yeah. But when it comes to Hollywood, it's maybe high density, but it's a little different creature than downtown.
Hollywood's really tricky because you've got a lot of density on the boulevard, commercial and residential, but then right up in the hills, you have people's dream homes, and they're gorgeous homes up in the, using the topography and so forth. And I think, when Kevin mentions, there are these plans for these centers, well, LA has grown really slowly. And there are a lot of people who live in those houses. Nobody gave them the memo that, this is going to be a center of activity in 30 years. They're concerned about their property values. They're concerned about their views. They're certainly concerned about the traffic. If they're coming down a Beechwood Canyon, for instance, and they think they literally are going to be imprisoned, then they have some really, they have legitimate concerns.
You can't ignore the growth, though.
No, you can't.
You simply can't.
Yeah.
With the amount of people that are moving into the city and the housing needs, both at the affordable level and at the market housing level, at some point in time, we have to accommodate the growth. So it isn't about the city or the infrastructure, the developer. the folks taking the financial risk and the citizenry being in opposition. That shouldn't be the way it's about. There are three legs of a tripod, and we need to get together.
How can they,
Well, we have to be on the same page, right? And how can
they not be in opposition when you think about it? Because you have on the one hand this need that the city espouses, developers espouse, that we've got a growing population. We need to go up. Millennials want it. Young professionals want it.
But how practical is it?
But then you go into neighborhoods that, as you said, that isn't what they signed up for.
Well, not just that, though. I mean, things change, and that's fine. But, for example, I want to bring this up because the big retail chain, Target, as you know, has had to stop construction. Yes, on a giant store in Hollywood.
Yeah, the city of LA had approved a new store on Sunset and Western near the 101 freeway. A judge has stopped construction for now. Target's building a 74-foot high structure in an area that can't exceed 35 feet.
Yeah, community groups want it shortened back down to the 35 feet height limit, which is, what it is in that area. The project affects hundreds of construction workers and, of course, millions of dollars in investment that have been stopped. One of the attorneys that has been retained by these community groups to stop the developments in Hollywood is Robert Silverstein. He was unable to join our panel tonight as he's traveling.
But in front of 5 different judges, he's won the legal battle to stop the city from turning Hollywood, or he would say, into a dense skyscraper zone, and he accuses the city of stopping the public's right to an open and transparent process.
So your thoughts on that? And I will say this, I remember that Target very well because it used to be a Zodi's way back in the day. That's when I had my ears pierced. Who knew? I remember this.
And I won't go into too much detail because there may still be active litigation on that particular site. But it does come down to really what is the zoning in different parts of Hollywood and what's expected. In that area, there is basically a 30-foot limit for commercial development. Mixed-use development is allowed to go a little bit higher to 75 feet. So the approvals Target sought was to build a more urban store with a higher height limit under those rules that are really reserved for mixed-use housing. Ultimately, in that instance, the court did not find favor with the city's way of granting it and has asked the developer to return to the city for new approvals.
Isn't parking an issue also? That's pretty huge to that.
Parking is, I don't believe that case has reduced parking, but I think the orientation of the parking. A lot of this also goes about how do we fit parking into the development. And the city, from a planning point of view, is looking to get more creative with parking. We put it in the back of a building. Can we put it underground? Can we put it up in the air? But the requirements for parking are not going away.
Explain, Kevin, the argument. I think some people might have trouble conceptualizing it. Higher density actually helps reduce car traffic. I would think higher density, more people, more cars. Explain that.
I think we're going to have a city of choices, and there's not going to be one choice that's for everybody. We're always going to maintain our heritage of single-family areas, of our lower density areas, but as we continue to grow, more and more of our corridors may benefit from mixed-use housing that provides options where you'll still have a car or an Uber or a Zip car, but you may be able to do a lot of your day-to-day interaction on foot, and that's where that extra density really helps create those amenities. It also creates a sense of oftentimes transitional issues with neighboring buildings. Are they taller than neighboring buildings? How are they designed? Are they designed in a way that really reinforces pedestrian activity? A cinder block wall along a street is not going to be that interesting. But what if those are storefronts with cafes and active uses and nice trees? That's what we're looking to
So I've seen that transition with the mixed-use buildings. I want to ask you, Scott, you represent developers.
Yes.
Do developers really care, though, about the public space? In that when you think about this, I hear developers say, we need to change these laws. They're Byzantine, and any project will be attacked and shut down. And then you have opponents who say, wait a second, like the Millennium project, who say, look, rules matter. You can't just go to the city with your contacts and your friends and get things greenlit quickly.
I sit on all sides of it. I'm a developer. I'm a lawyer that represents developers, and I've lived in this city all of my life. And we own property throughout the city, dozens of buildings. What we're doing now in terms of development on transportation corridors and trying to mitigate traffic and reducing the requirement that people jump into one car per person. I heard the mayor talk the other day, and he said, and you guys won't do it, he was talking to an audience, but if you would all just carpool one day a week together.
Right, Mayor Eric Garcetti.
Yes, go from 1.6 to 1.1 to 1.6 people per car, we wouldn't have any more traffic, and I wouldn't have to find $10 billion to build a light rail system.
So
I get it.
Yeah, so Josh, help me here with two narratives.
Yeah.
And you hear these narratives all the time. The one narrative is that you can't get the costs and the red tape and the regulation of building something in LA is just onerous. The other one is developers run this town. and that they
And
look
rules
at all
matter.
the building going up, and it's crony capitalism, and the developers get what they want. So what is the truth?
I think one thing that's really interesting is that we have Byzantine regulations on both ends. The city's zoning code is incomprehensible to anyone besides Kevin who lives with it. Likewise, CEQA, which is one of the tools that neighborhood groups use to prevent what they consider bad development, that too is incredibly Byzantine. I mean, Robert Silverstein, for what it's worth, knows CEQA inside and out and knows how to use it to help his clients, whether disingenuously or genuinely. I'll leave that, for them. But we have these opposing complexities. I think in a perfect world, we would like CEQA reform and zoning code reform. And these things bubble up all the time. And Mayor Garcetti, 10 years ago in City Council, wanted 10-2, which was to take 10 sets of permits and make it 2 sets. CEQA reform comes up in Sacramento literally every year. Where does it go? Maybe inches. So,
and maybe just a quick note on that. It's all about increasing a sense of what's expected, predictability, and how can we have a more responsive code. So for example, the mayor has made a priority of redoing our zoning code, which was originally adopted in 1946.
Wow.
Certainly time for an overhaul.
You're not
I think
kidding.
all sides can agree that having a modernized code, and the debate is how does it work, but a code that's a lot more easier to understand is going to benefit everybody.
Because former city council member, for example, Tom LaBonge, opposed the Millennium project, is our understanding, but he did say we need to do something to build, but we have to do it in the right way. And I think at the end of the day, we all sit on the same side, but we just have to figure it out. Dialogue. Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you so much. That's all the time that we have for you now, but again, thank you for being here, and we ask you to comment.
Yeah, and thanks to our guests, Scott Chaplin, Kevin Keller, and Josh Stevens, and of course, thanks to David Nazar.
You've heard from us, and now we'd love to hear from you. Please go to the Studio SoCal page on Facebook. Be sure to like us, share any comments or questions that you may have.
Or feel free to tweet us about tonight's show at the Studio SoCal Twitter page. We always enjoy hearing from you.
We also invite you to watch the show online as well as previous episodes of the series by going to pbssocal.org and clicking on Studio SoCal.
On behalf of the entire Studio SoCal team, thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Right here on Studio SoCal.